I was trapped within my body. I'd been quite heavily sedated afterwards so that they could run tests, because seizures and GBS that's not something that generally happens with the disorder. And that was the first moment that I felt, oh my God, I'm not well.
Conversation with just me, and trust me, I'll give it a chance. Now take my hand, stop it, and the man on the jukebox, and then we start to dance. Now I'm singing like, girl, you know I want your love. Your love was handmade for somebody like me. Come on now, follow my lead. I may be crazy, don't mind me. Say, boy, let's not talk too much. Grab on my waist and put that body on me. Come on now, follow my lead. Come on now, follow my lead. Girl, you know I want your love. Your love was handmade for somebody like me. Come on now, follow my lead. I may be crazy, don't mind me. Say, boy, let's not talk too much. Grab on my waist and put that body on me. Come on now, follow my lead. Come on now, follow my lead.
My body went grey and my stats just dropped and dropped and dropped. My name's Rachael Bailey, I'm 22, and I was a fresher at Liverpool John Moores in 2014. I thought I was just, I had some, pre-night out anxiety, or I felt a bit nervous because my hands and my toes kept tingling, and I just felt a bit weird. But obviously, you think you're being dramatic, and I pushed through. Went on a night out, and it was a good night out, but I had this kind of, I knew I didn't feel well, but I wasn't sure what it was. I had a new pair of heels on, and so I thought, well, that's probably why, my feet are tingling. And towards the end of the night, my legs were just getting heavier and heavier and heavier. And I think I went home about 4 AM. The next day I woke up and I thought it was just a really bad hangover. Worst comes to worst, I'd trapped a nerve in my back. I had this really intense back pain, and I spent the whole day lying down. I knew something wasn't right, but because I was 19, I was relatively healthy. I mean, I had been drinking the night before. I just assumed maybe I'd danced too much, maybe the shoes had hurt me. I didn't think anything would be drastically wrong. I just thought, I'll be fine. Tomorrow I'll wake up and I'll feel normal again. I was taken into the Queen's Medical Centre in Nottingham, and they diagnosed me probably within about 3 hours with GBS.
Guillain-Barre Syndrome. a condition of the peripheral nervous system affecting the nerve roots. Starts off usually in the hands and feet, spreads to the arms and legs, and then gradually gets worse. It comes up the body, so it can affect your breathing, swallowing, everything. And of course you don't know to what severity it's going to develop in any individual person. It affects about 1,200 people a year, so it's quite rare, but pretty terrifying when you've got it.
First time I felt scared was the doctors were on ward round, and they kind of went through everything that had been going on, and they were going through my med list, and then they were like, and the seizure. I had no idea I'd had a seizure at that point. It's not something you remember. I'd been quite heavily sedated afterwards so that they could run tests, because seizures and GBS aren't, that's not something that generally happens with the disorder. The nurses came running, shouting, "We need some help in here." And this is what my mum said. Unfortunately, she witnessed the whole thing. But she was at that point, you know, ferried away for them to start treatment and try and work out what was actually wrong with me. But that was the first, it was when I was told about that, that was the first time that I thought, oh my God. Intravenous immunoglobulins, that's the standard treatment for someone that's diagnosed with GBS, and little did they realise that it would cause swelling in 4 areas of my brain, which is what led to the seizures. It's kind of like an allergic reaction, basically. So my first seizure was the grand mal seizure that my mum had witnessed when I was in critical care. And the second one, I remember the lead up to this one, because it was when they were taking I was being unintubated, they were removing it. And I remember them telling me, you know, cough as they pulled it out. And then they had to see if I could cough by myself again. Because if you can't, you know, you can't get the phlegm off your lungs, it's not good. And so I remember trying to cough, and that's all I remember.
When you develop Guillain-Barre, one of the problems is that you can't cough, and you can't cough effectively, and obviously she was also on a machine helping her to breathe. So in order to help get Rachael off the ventilator, to help her breathe on her own again, we needed to treat and perform techniques to manage the mucus on her chest, that she couldn't cough up herself effectively. So for this we spent a lot of time treating Rachael's chest, so using techniques to try and mobilise mucus that's secreted from the lungs and is also generally over-secreted when you're mechanically ventilated. And if we don't remove these secretions, then this is when bacterial infection or viruses develop, and this would have made Rachael really unwell.
When I moved into halls, within the first 2 weeks we ended up having about 3 or 4 A&E visits, simply because we all ended up being liabilities. And I remember towards the end of the 6 weeks that I'd been there, I got what I thought was freshers flu. So I'd been really, really unwell to the point where I was ringing my mum crying, you know, thinking I was going to die. Little did I know what was going to come. But I ended up being diagnosed with a urinary tract infection, and then I got told that all freshers think they've got meningitis, because at this point I was really, really, really unwell. And turns out that I actually had meningitis, and it wasn't until I'd gone into City Hospital and had the lumbar puncture that diagnosed the GBS, where they found proteins suggestive of the meningitis virus. and that was kind of what triggered, well, that's what they assume could have triggered the GBS, because with GBS there tends to be an infection about 2 weeks prior to the onset of symptoms. When I eventually went home on my reading week, we'd written a note all to each other, my flat had, and I remember writing, "See you Thursday, Higgins," obviously planning to be back so we could go out for Halloween, but it wasn't to be.
I was on a lot of medication because with about 20% of people who have GBS, they have really intense pain because you kind of lose control of the nerves in your skin, everywhere. And so I had really, really, really intense pain to the point if someone would so much as like stroke me with a feather, it was like my skin was being burnt. And so I was on a lot of drugs. And so I can't remember everything that happened, but I didn't adapt well to being in hospital. You know, I'd been kind of on the brink of having my first taste of real independence. I'd just moved out, I'd just moved city. I'd been having this amazing 6 weeks with brand new people, doing like new things. I thought you know, life couldn't have really got better at that point. And there I was with people having to speak for me. I couldn't even talk by myself. I couldn't ask questions. I was just stuck in a bed. People were having to roll me, people were having to dress me, people were having to clean me. And from having, you know, the most independence I'd ever had to having zero. I was basically like a newborn baby again. I couldn't do anything. And so psychologically, I struggled. I know I said on numerous occasions, put me to sleep, like just put me to sleep. I don't want to be here. I don't think I ever wanted to die, but I certainly didn't want to be in my situation anymore. I was transferred to Linden Lodge, which is the neurorehabilitation centre that's part of City Hospital. And I was terrified because for the past, you know, X amount of weeks, X amount of months, I had had 24/7 supervision from a nurse. If anything had gone wrong, all I had to do was look up and there would be someone watching me. And I remember being absolutely terrified because I was in this brand new place with a lot of other people who were probably not at that stage, not as poorly as I was, but still needed attention, and their nurse's attention had to be shared. That was very nerve-wracking, and because I couldn't press the buzzers, that made it more so. Luckily they really, they adapted, and I had a baby monitor. At this point I could talk, my trachea had been removed. The only reason that I'd been allowed to go to the rehab centre was because I didn't have to have a machine breathing for me anymore. When I went to rehab, that's when my physiotherapy kind of got more intense. It was the most painful and just hard work I've ever had to do. And when I was in the rehab, I remember about 3 weeks in, every time I'd seen my physio coming towards me, I'd burst into tears. Every time I saw the hoist, I'd burst into tears. And my physio came and sat with me and she was like, "Look, Rachel, you're not going to get better and you're not going to leave unless you start trying." And at this point, I hadn't really thought about it. She was like, "All the pain that you're feeling is good pain. It's a sign that your body wants to work again. It's a sign that, you know, you need to push through it." And I was so desperate to leave. All I wanted to do was go home. And that's when it clicked, like, I need to get over this pain. I need to just like crack on. And I think it was from 2 months after that I ended up leaving and I walked out. Up until that point, I was barely sitting up because every time they moved me, I would just freeze in pain and I'd scream and scream and scream and scream. And they had, yeah, obviously they had other patients, but I was quite difficult. I was a diva, but it was that moment in rehab that made me realise, you know, this is the only reason, this is the only way I'm going to leave, this is the only way I'm going to get better, is if I actually start trying. so important to find happiness from like small achievements. Like now, if I paint my nails and they look really good, I'm literally like, oh, I'm amazing. Like I'm really, really pleased with myself. So being able to get up and walk is wonderful. Being able to like catch the bus by myself and walk and breathe by myself. Like, having a trachea isn't nice. So like I appreciate those tiny things that everyone takes for granted.